and once that discussion is complete, if there's anyone from the public who would like to ask questions or be involved in the discussion, you're more than welcome. I see we have a couple people, so thank you. And I'll call us to order now. At this time, Ms. Richard, I think I would maybe call on you just to refresh our memories. And I know that I'd like to thank Vicki Gaynor, our Deputy City Clerk, for sending out the comparative analyses of the other cities that she was able to find. It helped to see some research. And so we'll kind of have our memories refreshed, and then everybody can weigh in with your thoughts, and maybe we can come to consensus on an agreement.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a workshop. We've already had a workshop, and you have had this come before you as far as the plan goes, the multimodal mobility plan, which we sent to the state, and it was approved. It's now in our comprehensive plan. The only part of it that has yet to be decided upon is what you actually would like the fee structure to be. There was a proposed fee structure, a suggested fee structure, which was sent to us by the consultant who looked at the data and analysis, etc. for the plan. They were subcontracted through Panhandle Engineering. The purpose of the plan and fee structure is to provide a mechanism whereby all new development is equitably charged for its transportation impacts. Impact fees, which the city have had for some time, have been frozen on everything other than residential. So commercial, industrial, other types of developments have not had to pay any impact fees because they were so high. This is a method whereby, and it's actually kind of state recommended, it's what the state preferred, whereby the city can start collecting some money, but the amount of monies collected won't be prohibitive to development and can be used on things other than just roads. Can actually be used on rails to trails, sidewalks, intersection improvements, extra trolley stops, extra trolley routes, cart paths, golf cart paths, whatever you would like to spend the money on to get people moving, multimodal. This is a little bit of a legal standard overview because I know that there were some questions at the last workshop regarding impact fees, mobility fees, and that kind of thing. This is not an impact fee. However, the impact fees that we do have in place in Florida, the legal requirements relating to impact fees were primarily established through case law and have been since the 1980s. And generally, impact fees had to comply with a dual rational nexus test, as do mobility fees, which require that they be supported by a study demonstrating the fees are proportionate in amount to the need created by the new development paying the fee and be spent in a manner that directs a proportionate benefit to new development, typically accomplished through establishment of benefit districts. We've just got one because we are so small. We're not a large city. And a list of capacity adding projects, which would be included in, and it's got the counties there, sorry, capital improvement plan. It would be the city's capital improvement plan. So you would decide what projects you wanted to do. They would go into the capital improvement plan, and then these multimodal mobility fees could be used to fund those projects or go towards other funding for those projects. Yeah, I apologize for the county being in there. I pulled some of this language to try and explain this to you from some other places that have mobility fees. There was some, in 2006, there were some additional requirements which specified procedural and methodological prerequisites, but again, these were for impact fees, such as the requirement of the fee being based on most recent and localized data, and a 90-day requirement for fee changes and other similar requirements. However, in 2009, the legislation allowed fees to be decreased, and we have impact fees right now, which will be being decreased, allowed fees to be decreased without the 90-day notice period required to increase the fees. and purported to change the standard of legal review associated with impact fees. What is being proposed with the mobility fee is a decrease of the current impact fees. So that dual rational nexus test that is required for impact fees would have taken place at the time when our impact fees were voted on, whenever that was. So if you're reducing the amount that is being collected, then you don't have to do that 90-day, meet that 90-day requirement. For a mobility fee, you can do the ordinance, the 2 readings of the ordinance. And that same legislation in 2009 required that the Florida Department of Community Affairs, which is now the DEO, and Florida Department of Transportation conduct studies on mobility fees, which were done and completed in 2010. And then in 2013, House Bill 319 applied mostly to concurrency management authorities, but also encouraged local governments to adopt alternative mobility systems using a series of tools identified in 3180 Florida statutes, including, and this goes into like the strategies, and also exempting or discounting impacts of locally desired development, such as development in urban areas, redevelopment, job creation, and mixed use on the transportation system, assigning secondary priority to vehicle mobility and primary priority to ensuring a safe, comfortable, and attractive pedestrian environment with convenient interconnection to transit, which is what this does with the multimodal, and reducing impact fees or local access fees to promote development within urban areas, multimodal transportation districts, and a balance of mixed-use development in certain areas or districts. So that's why we had the 3 tiers proposed with our fee schedule, because what that's trying to do is encourage development, housing, new commercial development in those areas where there is walkability. There are other ways of, getting from home to the store without having to get into your car, and not having everything go to the outside, whereby we're going to have to extend our infrastructure and people have to get into a car to get to something. So it's just encouraging. We don't have a lot of infill, but we do have some. And if they have a fee reduction, it's going to encourage them, hopefully, to locate within that infill area. Finally, under House Bill 319, an alternative mobility system was recommended that is not mobility fee-based, must not impose upon new development any responsibility for funding an existing transportation deficiency. So this is new development. These aren't, people aren't going to have to pay for existing problems. This is, you've got a new development you want to put on here. This is money that's been collected for capital improvement items for new things, new development paying for additional things. And this is a dual rational nexus test, which basically I'm going to let Rob talk about. He wanted to talk about that. That's fine, isn't it, Rob? You wanted to...
You really want me to talk about that?
Well, this is what Mike Hemmons, who did this study for us, when I asked him about, because it's supposed to, the impact fees have to meet the dual rational nexus test, and so do mobility fees. And the dual rational nexus test is a process that establishes a relationship between exactions, or the money that is collected from a development for an improvement that will benefit the users of that development. As applied to transportation, it relates to the physical location of a development project to a transportation network improvement. So here it would be roads, or like we said, rails to trails, transit stops, sidewalks, anything that connects the development that's going in, or the project, to the transportation network of some sort. And the standard test uses data from the United States Department of Transportation household trip length by trip purpose. So what their study looks at is the average trip length for all trip purposes, such as a trip purpose is going to work, going shopping, recreation, going to the restaurant. That's a trip purpose. And they found that the average trip length is 6 miles. So when we did our mobility plan, when we had that grant and we put our mobility plan together, this was something that Rob had a bit of a problem with at the time, and Mike Hemmons checked with the state, with DEO, and asked if the way that he was applying it was okay, and they said yes. And what Mike Hemmons is saying, that if per US DOT household standard says that the average trip length is 6 miles, Lynn Haven's geographic boundaries are 3 miles wide and 3.5 miles long, which means that all trips from any development within the city, from any development, whether they're going shopping or, you know, to school, within the city, not outside the city, but within the city boundaries, would be less than half the national average. Therefore, any development within the city would meet the dual rational nexus test to any proposed transportation network improvement. That's what, when I double checked with Mike, he said that that is what he was recommending. DEO are fine with that, but Rob has some reservations. And a mobility fee is a one-time charge levied against new development, designed to cover the portion of the capital cost of infrastructure capacity consumed by new development. The principal purpose is to assist in funding the implementation of projects identified in the capital improvements element and other capital improvement programs for the respective facility service categories, and it replaces concurrency at the site plan review stage. So whereas we would used to look at proportionate fair share, we have taken that out. So when we're looking at reviewing site plans for a subdivision or a commercial venture, that is when we would let them know what their mobility fee would be. And the difference between a mobility fee and a tax is a mobility fee is generally regarded as a regulatory function established as a condition for improving property and is not established for the primary purpose of generating revenue as taxes are. They must convey a proportional benefit to the fee payer, which is accomplished through the establishment of benefit districts, but we're small, so we've just got that one, and are spent in the same district. So any money we get is going to be spent in the same district. A mobility fee must be tied to a proportionate need for new infrastructure capacity created by the new development. And the fee schedule suggested in the plan was derived from previous impact fees imposed by the city and averages from similar sized municipalities throughout Florida. Purpose was to bring them current with market trends while not making them excessive in terms of adjacent market locations that would deter development from the city. And if the mobility fees are less than the amount of fee imposed by the current impact fee schedule, the city is not bound by the 90-day notice period. And I think, in the process of developing a suggested fee structure for the city, as well as looking at our impact fees, the following mobility fee systems were reviewed by Mike: Dade City, Sarasota, Alamonte Springs, Maitland, Osceola County, and Alachua County. And I have since pulled up a number of others and looked at them. You know, there a lot of cities and counties are now changing from impact fees to multimodal fees. The statutes actually recommend that we do that. And the fee structure should be kept as simple as possible. It should not be rigid or adopted into the comp plan, but established by ordinance so it can be revisited and modified as necessary due to market fluctuation. What was recommended was a 3-tier schedule, thereby encouraging location of development and redevelopment into infill areas. And the 3 tiers are the urban cluster district, which is on the map that I gave you tonight on the second sheet and was also in the information that you have been given previously. Anything that develops or wants to build any houses or any commercial, any develops in this area, it was being recommended that they have a 50% reduction in fees so as to try and help them, you know, locate in that area. Then the community redevelopment area, which is actually within the urban cluster district, would only pay 10% of the total fee, just 10%. That they've got a very, very big reduction. And then citywide, the remainder of the city would pay the full fee. And then there's the fee schedule, and that doesn't obviously have, that's by land use category, so it obviously doesn't have every single type of potential business in there, but just as we do when we're looking at what's allowed in certain land uses with the ULDC, we would fit the appropriate type of business or whatever into the appropriate category. So one of the things I was thinking is that maybe because there's only a couple of things on this list which are actually higher than the current impact fees. One of them is restaurant with drive-through, which is a lot higher for some reason if it's outside the urban area. And then there is another one on there somewhere, but all the rest, the single family detached is higher. So I don't know whether the best thing to do then would just be to make sure that all of the fees, all of the new fees are lower than the original impact fees. Because if the dual nexus test stood when we went out for the impact fee, which would have meant for an impact fee, you have to go out for a huge study. You know, they're expensive. They always come back with huge figures, impact fees. So if that process was gone through for the impact fee amounts, that passed the dual nexus test, then to me, common sense tells me that anything lower is going to pass the dual nexus test. Thank you.
Thank you. May I ask one question before I then see if the board has other questions as well? Should the commission members today, should we come to a consensus that we would like to go forward with a certain fee schedule, whether it be this one or a revised one, at that point, will we need, and maybe this is directed to attorney and you,
Ordinance.
do we need 2 hearings before we can do an ordinance, or how will we handle
We would just write up the ordinance, and then it would come back to you in the form of an ordinance for 2 readings, first reading and then second
So 2
reading,
readings
public
of the
hearing.
Well, and it might be a resolution. I don't know how the original ordinance was constructed, but if it's an appendix in the code, it would just be a resolution, 1 reading. But if it requires a code change, then it would have to have 2 readings.
Okay, thank you very much. That was my question.
I think it would just be, I don't think it's a code change because it's not going in the ULDC. I think it's just it's a fee on the fee schedule or whatever.
So do other members of the board have questions for Amanda, or would you like to enter into discussion? Or anyway, just speak up if you have something to say, and we'll just let it be a discussion rather than being recognized every time you say something, okay?
Developer would pay, if a developer comes into the city and wants to develop a piece of property, do we make the developer pay that mobility fee at the time of the development, or does each builder have to pay when they pull the permit to build the house?
It's the developer, and with the proportionate fair share, it used to be the developer as well. But somehow or other, with these impact fees that we have now, it seems that it's kind of changed so that each individual person comes and pulls it. But ordinarily, these things, it's the developer. On these kind of fees, it's the developer that pays it.
Well, and that was my question, because I do know that, you know, of course, I think y'all know how I feel about impact fees and the cost of construction. You know, I mean, we charge a builder when he pulls a permit. We charge him an address fee, a police impact fee, a fire impact fee, a transportation impact fee, a recreational impact fee, a stormwater impact fee, a sewer impact fee. I mean, a water impact fee. I mean, there's several impact fees that we're charging. Right now, you know, we are charging that $449 transportation impact fee, which would offset on the residential side. But the question becomes, does the developer pay it? Because if the developer pays it, then we can actually have a savings of $500 to the builders, because they wouldn't be paying it. And then, of course, the second question I've got, because I think you just answered that. I mean, it should be the developer, but there's a gray area because apparently we've been making the builders pay it.
I think with subdivisions, the developer. I mean, I don't know. When I've worked for other cities, it's been the developer. For some reason, I don't know if this happened when the impact fees were frozen. I can understand how, you know, obviously if it's someone owns a piece of land, I own a little piece of land, I'm building a house on it, it would be me. But if it's a developer with a subdivision, then it would be the developer, but then they just pass that cost on when they sell the house.
Sure.
So, you know, even for the single family, I understand they do pay a lot, but the transportation fees will be gone. They wouldn't pay that transportation impact fee. This would be instead. So if we reduced all of them so that everybody was paying less than they were now, then there really isn't anything to complain about because they'll be paying less.
On the residential side, I agree, but correct me if I'm not wrong. The 4,496.76 has been frozen. We haven't been charging that fee on any of the commercial side.
That's correct.
So obviously we are going to look at an increase in the entire commercial side. The 444.96, that's per 1,000 square foot?
Yes. That's why it was ridiculously prohibitive. When I came to work here in the city, I didn't come here until 2012. When I came here, that had already been frozen because the developers were complaining about it. And transportation impact fees at that time were frozen like across the board, really. The county froze theirs because of the economic downturn. When it was like boom time and everybody was building, people were paying, I think. But then, you know, we had the collapse. And so they were frozen to try and help keep the economy going a bit, you know, so that developers could still develop. And in fact, Commissioner Barnes, you probably remember, you were probably here.
That's absolutely correct. That's what we did.
Well, obviously, I have a concern. You know, the residential side of it, I can see, you know, because you're actually, I mean, yeah, the residential, you're looking at another $500 per house charge, but that's not a significant amount of money. On the commercial side, these numbers scare me as far as stifling growth. I mean, I know we need to do something, but, you know, if I'm a builder and I'm looking at, you know, I want to build a restaurant and I'm looking at, say, a 10,000 square foot restaurant and I've got a $40,000 impact fee for mobility, I'm going to go to Southport and I'm going to build it where I don't have to pay it. You know, I mean, that's just my thinking on it. So, and then the other issue I have with it is if we do decide to go forward with it, things that, in my opinion, are a service to the community ought to be looked at as not being charged, like place of worship. You know, that's a nonprofit organization that I don't think should be paying a mobility impact fee. I mean, that's a service to the community. It's not, they're not there trying to, you know, make a profit. But those are, you know, off the top, just some of my issues I've got.
Well, going back to the developer versus the individual, is that a policy issue? Is that I mean, if the developer's not paying it and they should, is that a policy issue that we need to enforce internally, or is that a resolution, ordinance, or whatever we need to do to make sure that either or just to clarify who's going to pay it so that we know what we're doing?
Is it in the statutes anywhere? Because the statutes say development will pay for, I don't know.
It should be an ordinance, the ordinance that we adopted, who
For their
pays
impact fees?
and
or-
when, yeah.
I'll have to try and find that ordinance.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
So
I
I would
believe
just,
city manager wanted to chime in.
I can kind of tell you a little bit from what seems to happen not only here but also my previous life. Used to have developers that would come in and build a subdivision, and they would pay for all the like primary underground electric service, all this stuff, the taps, and the efforts to try to control their cost. And you know, one thing I've seen in my past is that they would only say, do not set the transformers, put a looping pedestal there. Well, that saved them $2,500, $3,000 a light. So as we did that, we actually had to go back and configure onto the actual homeowners. Somebody had to pay that extra difference.
Right.
And what they was trying to do is get their lights, you know, because it was, like you said earlier, growth was dead. So I think that may be a little bit what we have seen in the past.
okay. Well, I would just make the comment that I think we need to kind of clean that up if it's an internal thing or whatever, and just enforce whatever the ordinance says, if it's especially if it's an ordinance item. I mean, and just, you know what I'm saying, and just, or if it's a policy item. The other thing is, I hate to ask, but Rob, if you've got reservations, I certainly want to, I'd like to hear what they are.
Sure. I mean, we've talked about this before a little bit, and my reservations are because this is kind of new. I mean, the mobility fee is new. I know the state is behind it, but fundamentally this is a constitutional issue, not necessarily a statutory issue. And Amanda and I have talked about this for quite some time. you know, the tension is what is a tax and what is a fee. And so clearly a tax is something that's levied by the government for the general benefit of everybody. A fee is something that you pay for and you get a use out of. So, you know, example would be, I go to the park, I pay a $10 fee, I get to use the park, it benefits me only. And so in between those two issues, there's a huge gray area. Taxes require a referendum of the voters. And for years, cities and counties have tried to get around that requirement by having fees, having things classified as fees, not taxes. And there's a series of case law out there that says what you can and cannot do that makes things a tax and what makes things a fee. One of the things that has been held up over the years is the impact fee analysis by the courts, that dual rational nexus that Amanda was talking about. And in order to do that, you typically have to have a plan that shows the kind of improvements that you're going to have, and the CRAs use a similar type of issue, a plan or set out capital expenditures that are going to the city's going to build because of the new development. And so it's tied to the new development. So you have that cost that's tied to the new development. You have a proportionate share how that's going to be paid, and then you assess the fee, basically. So the benefit can be rationally tied to the cost of to provide the development. And that's how the courts have gotten around that. The problem I've had with the mobility fee is, one, is that there's no case law on this at all. There's no case law, there's no attorney general opinions, there's nothing. It's brand new. Now, the state has encouraged it, and Amanda and I have talked about the difference between planners and lawyers, basically, is the planners are very result-oriented, and this is a good thing. And I'm not saying this isn't a good thing. It's good to have sidewalk, it's good to have buses, it's good to have urban development. Versus the lawyers, which look at the process and how do we get there. And so the process is not settled is on this particular issue. There's about, after talking to Amanda today, I did some more research and read a little more about it. Certainly the state is behind this. DEO has tactically approved what we're planning on doing. I've had discussions with our consultant about this particular issue, and one of the things that causes me some concern is that his philosophy is that every development, every fee will benefit everybody in the city because we're so small, because it ties to a transportation network and it's so small. That makes complete sense. However, that kind of blows up the new development pays for itself, and it starts acting much more like a tax versus a fee. And those issues have not been settled. And so that's my biggest concern with it. But the city has adopted it already. Locally, I did do a poll or an informal poll. Nobody in Bay County that I'm aware of has adopted these things except for Panama City. Panama City did it, they implemented it, and they stopped enforcing it right after they implemented it, mostly because developers complained.
They didn't adopt it for the whole of the city. They just looked at that new development going where the old airport.
Right, they adopted it for the whole city, but they stopped enforcing it everywhere except for Sweet Bay. And that's in a development agreement, so Sweet Bay. And they have not paid any money to that yet. In the development agreement, there was a delay in how that was going to be paid out. And so we've adopted it. It's the chances of it being challenged are very, very slim. And the chances of it, especially with all the state being behind it and everything, but there's always that risk until there's established case law. The FDOT study talks about the Supreme Court in Washington looked at this benefit the entire community issue that our consultant has brought to us, and they said that was okay in their impact fee ordinance for the state of Washington. Nothing in Florida. And so just as my job as the lawyer is to, I guess, warn you guys about this kind of stuff. And so I'm warning you. I'm not saying it's illegal. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm not saying there's nothing inappropriate about it at all. I'm just saying that those are issues that are out there. This is an unsettled area. And along those lines, if you do make changes to the fee schedule that was proposed by the consultant, because he was a consultant that we paid for and supposedly had some basis for generating these fees. My suggestions would be that you either reduce all of them at the same time or increase them based on the proportion they have, unless there is some specific rational reason why you want to make a change. And I guess, for instance, suppose the place of worship thing, if you wanted to exempt that, because even though they have an impact on the city, it's beneficial. I mean, I think you could do that, but you should cite that in any changes that we make. So those are my concerns. I hope that I didn't confuse the issue worse.
No, not at all.
Mayor,
That's,
Thank you.
that's what-
Yes,
if
go
I
ahead,
may.
Commissioner Russell.
Just, I guess, we've been here, a year and a couple of months. Just for background, what brought us down this road to begin with, from going from transportation impact fee to mobility fee? I mean, what was the reason that we looked at changing the method that we're charging to begin with?
We
Go ahead if you'd like. Go ahead.
We, as I said, in 2012, when I came, we did not have, well, we had the impact fees, but they were frozen. We also had, in our comprehensive plan, something called proportionate fair share. Proportionate fair share was in our comprehensive plan because prior to the economic downturn, when we had all that growth, the state was very concerned about all the traffic that was being put on the roads and the capacity on the roads, and a lot of roads were failing their level of service. The state didn't have the money to address all of those problems, and so the state said, okay, you're putting the traffic, you're passing these land use amendments to allow, because it was boom time, to allow low density to go to commercial or mixed use or whatever. So you're adding the traffic to the road, so we're going to make you being the city and the counties, collect the money for those failing segments of roads. So we had to put that in our comp plan. We had no control over it. And we had to identify the level of service on all of the roads. We had to count the capacity constantly. Whenever anybody was given a development order, they were given a concurrency notice. So they were, they either, there was enough capacity or there wasn't, just as we have to with water and sewer. The law stated that once we got within a certain percentage and we were going to fail, as soon as we failed, we had to start collecting proportionate fair share. We had no option about it, but only on those failing segments of road. So most cities had proportionate fair share and impact fees. Now the proportionate fair share, as I said, you would identify the failing segment of road, which was usually between one intersection and another. You would look to see what the remedy was to add more capacity, which might be another 2 lanes or something. You would look at the cost of adding those 2 lanes. You would look at how much extra capacity that gave you, maybe an extra 10,000 vehicle trips. And then you would divide the cost by the number of vehicle trips. And that would be the amount that the developer would have to pay. The developer would have to pay to get his DO. And I can tell you on Highway 22, I was working in Callaway at the time, on Highway 22, on the failing segment of road, they had to pay $8,000 for each vehicle they put on that road. So when you do whenever a developer came in, they would have to give us a trip generation report and a trip distribution. So if they were going to put a subdivision there, they had to tell us, and there's the ITE trip generation handbook, so we can look and we can have a look at the code, the land use code, and we can say, okay, you're putting 70 new houses in this development. That means you're going to put however many new trips, vehicle trips on the road, PM peak hour. And for one house, it could be one. It can be more than one sometimes, PM peak hour. That developer would have to pay $8,000 per vehicle coming out of that subdivision. That was a lot of money, and we had to do it. So most places froze their impact fees. They didn't have to pay, we wouldn't double charge. If they had to pay prop share, then we wouldn't make them pay impact fees, whatever was the highest, So if they kind of paid both, if their prop share was just one trip and the impact fees were higher, we'd collect the rest in impact fees. Well, in around 2000, I think it was around 2009, 2010, after boom time, certain cities and counties were told that they would do LASs, dense urban land use areas. We are, and that means that we have a certain number of residents per square mile. we're a DULAS. If you qualify as a DULAS, you're allowed to take proportionate share out of your comp plan. Some people can't. Some places still have it. They have to have it in there. They have to still charge it. The county still charges it. But we were allowed to take it out. But if you take it out, while it's still in there, you have to apply it. And ours was still in there, and I wanted to take it out. But then Lynch died, and then Mr. Schubert came on board. And while Mr. Schubert was on board, I noticed that there was a grant that, DEO give you small technical assistance grants every year for the last few years. They're not very much. They're about $20,000. So I knew that DEO wanted cities and counties to adopt mobility fees instead of proportionate fair share and impact fees. And I knew that we didn't have anything, we weren't collecting anything, and that we were going to suffer eventually because things are picking up again. We've got traffic coming on the roads, we've got no way of collecting any money. What happens, the state isn't requiring us to collect it now, so it's easy to sit back and not collect the money, but then what you're going to get is people coming up here, citizens not very happy that we're allowing development to go in, and what's going to happen to the roads and then the extra traffic. So we have to, I thought, collect money somehow. So I asked Mr. Schubert if I could apply for the grant, the technical assistance grant, to try and look into a mobility fee. He said yes. Well, that's what we did. We applied for the grant. We were awarded the grant, but it was only $20,000, and we didn't want it to cost the city any money. So I did most of the work myself. But then for this piece of it, the actual kind of data collection, on the roads and looking at a potential fee, I don't have that kind of expertise. And so Panhandle Engineering subcontracted Mike Hemmons, who used to work for DOT, to do this part of it for us. As part of that grant, we had to produce a plan and a proposed fee schedule, but we don't have to adopt this fee schedule. We had to send the plan to the state. The plan was brought to the commission to vote on. They approved the plan. We sent it to the state. The state were fine with it. They said, yes, go ahead, put this in your comp plan instead of the prop share. We took the prop share out. We put this in. So it's in there. And if we want to implement it, we should. If it's in the comp plan, we should be implementing it. But you can decide what you want the fees. You wouldn't want to go higher than this, but you could go lower.
Mm-hmm. Does that help clarify, Commissioner Russell?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Commissioner Tender, did you have any? Commissioner Barnes? Commissioner Friend? No? I would just say, and we're running a little short on time, but I think we can be flexible between the two workshops for a few moments, since we're still trying to wrap up and we haven't given the public an opportunity to speak at all on this either. My concern is that if we continue to not move in any direction, that we're still not collecting impact fees from businesses, and the residents of Lynn Haven are having it squarely placed upon their shoulders. And that's where my concern is. There have been many, many years now that have passed that the businesses have not had to contribute, and so that's where my concern is. I would like to see someone make some kind of a recommendation, either to, let's extend this to another workshop for maybe some more discussion, maybe reducing the fees by, the whole category, maybe 10%, 20%, leaving it the same. But something besides just saying nothing. I think that, I think as a city we've got to look at the impact that businesses have. And if you look at our 77 corridor, what impact that traffic is having on our city, I really think we have to consider, do we really want to let these businesses continue without, they just come in and not have to pay their fair share to be part of this community. What I really like about this plan is that within the old plat of Lynn Haven and in the CRA, that they're discounted heavily, that it's not a burden, to come into the old part of Lynn Haven. And I think there's room in that citywide category for us to look at, if we're not comfortable with how high they are, to consider a reduction. But as you would do in any math, I think if you reduce it one place, you probably need to do that's just my thought, maybe an overall 10% reduction or 20%. So those are my thoughts. And I wanted to give an opportunity for the public and then bring it back one more time to the commission, and then we'll move forward with our audit report. And I do thank you for your patience in waiting on us on this. Anyone from the public want to speak to this before I ask for the commission's input anymore? Everybody's okay. Is there anything further anyone wants to say, or any recommendations, including the attorney, the city manager? It's all, we're all a team here.
I would like,
No, go ahead.
I'd just like to add a little bit, what y'all been talking about up here. We really need to do something. The city does. We need to move forward. Right now, you're placing all this burden on the taxpayer, the residential taxpayers. We have grown significantly since it's been frozen with commercial and, not paying their fair share, of this fee. I'm okay with anything, that you might want to reduce, not reduce. But one good thing about the mobility versus the transportation, it does give the city more ability to shift the funds around to do more things with. The transportation fund, it's nice, but it is limited what we can do with the funds. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Yes.
I would just, I would like for us to try to hash out the fees, quite honestly. That's what the workshop's all about. If we can get there, and then that way, because we have already passed it. I've made comments during that meeting when we passed it. I think the mobility fee structure for Lynn Haven is perfect. We're a bedroom community. We want to be a walking community. It just makes sense that developments that are impacting the city, that we can spread those monies out across different mobility type of structures. So I'd like to see if, if someone has an issue with the amounts, do we have a number that's comfortable? I'm honestly, I'm okay with as it's presented. It came from the consultant. I know that the single family really stands out, but again, 50% of the urban clusters is 500. It's an increase of $50, and of course, like you mentioned, Mayor, the CRA is only 100. So that's a big reduction from the current. So I think that's what stands out. Does anybody else have anything? Does anybody have any fees in mind that you would like to say are better or would want to do?
I was going to say that I definitely agree with Commissioner Russell on the worship. I think, that is I think that's something that could be reduced a bit.
On which one? I'm sorry, I misunderstood you.
On the worship, place of
Yes.
worship.
Okay, gotcha.
That, I
Gotcha.
think, needs to be adjusted. Originally, I was gasping for air when I saw the 6,500 for the restaurant with drive-through, until you made the comment, and that made perfect sense to me too, that the franchise restaurants can afford. They have that kind of money. And, they can afford to have that type of impact fee. So that doesn't bother me as much as it used to, that 6,500.
Well, yeah.
I don't know.
I would just say
I
keep
have
in mind that
different-
not all drive-throughs would be potentially, they
Well,
would, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah, majority.
Plus the issue is this,
Yeah.
just because somebody can afford it, do you have to make them pay it? Is
No.
it fair to make some, that's my argument,
Well, it's-
you got a 2,000 square foot house. Well, the billionaire shouldn't be paying more because he's a billionaire. It's still a 2,000 square foot house.
That was actually not the point I made at all. The point that I made was if we had a restaurant with a drive-through, these generally are franchised, and they are going to make a great deal of money in Lynn Haven from the taxpayers. They're going to get a great return for what they build. And if you think about a drive-through, their square footage is not going to be nearly what a sit-down restaurant is generally, because they just have the kitchen space and just a small, usually seating. So that was the point. I was certainly not saying, to tax the rich. That was not my intent at all.
So, and I would obviously agree with the worship, but legally, Rob, can we just take one out? Because I know you mentioned that if we reduce them, we want to reduce them all by a certain percentage, but can we actually remove someone from the list? None of this has been challenged, and you covered that in great detail, and I appreciate it, but would that be wise to do?
I believe Amanda stated at the last workshop that the gentleman that put this report together said that we could.
We could, okay.
Did he not tell you that we could adjust
And I get-
any individual fee where we wanted? They're not interrelated.
Yeah,
And again, none of it's been challenged. We really don't know until it's challenged.
right, all this is based on your impact to to the
community,
transportation
right.
mobility system. So for instance, I assume the reason why a drive-through is higher than a regular restaurant
Right.
is because you
Yeah,
got cars, a
greater.
lot more cars going
Right.
through a drive-through restaurant. And so, as far as the place of worship, Assembly Hall, I mean, I think if that's something that's important to the commission and you want to, as far as the clustering, I think it'd be okay to make a change with.
Well, then I would certainly suggest can we just, maybe as a suggestion, can we go down each line and talk about how we feel about each fee and maybe adjust it and try to come to a consensus?
I think we can do that.
Probably don't have
But
time.
my thought is that we also have our audit report for today. We could maybe go I'd like to leave them at least 30 minutes,
Oh, yeah.
if that's
Well,
acceptable.
then we
Okay.
can always come back for another
So,
workshop too. I don't.
Sure.
I mean, it doesn't
If
have to
we,
be today.
why don't we start going down the list and see where we get in the next
Okay.
few moments, and then if we need more time, maybe we can revisit. So, I would just, does anyone have objection to my just calling it out as we go down and everyone making a comment?
That works for me.
Single-family detached, 1,000. And I'm assuming if you don't make a comment that you're okay?
The reasoning behind the different fees between the CRA, the urban cluster, and the citywide? I mean,
just
as
remind
a
us
res-
of that.
as a
She
revenue.
explained that, she explained it in the beginning, so.
Well, and I understood the walking, okay, I get that then. As a revenue base, it doesn't matter where you develop, I mean.
It's because of trying to encourage businesses and people to locate within the urban area instead of sprawling out, which costs the city more in infrastructure, like infill, encourage infill.
Okay.
And arguably, somebody who builds in a concentrated area is going to have less impact on, a walkable community will have less
Sure.
transportation
Sure.
impact on than a spread out subdivision.
But if a developer wants to come and be annexed in, he's paying that extra fee. And that's where the increased revenue comes from, is if you annex a development into the city. And they would still get stuck paying the upper fee. I mean, I've got questions. I mean, I'm good with the numbers. I mean, I would like to say that I would like for us to revisit this in 6 months and see how it's affected growth. But the only fee I have a problem with on here is the worship fee.
Okay.
If we can reduce it, then I'm okay with the fees that are here.
Let's just remove it.
And my question would be though, on Assembly Hall, that's a little different thing. Is that like a theater structure? Is that a lecture hall? Is that something? Okay.
Would we want to separate those two then, a place of worship, and then have a separate item for assembly halls?
Because wouldn't Assembly Hall, would that also include the Sutherland? That would include
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
and places like that.
I think a suggestion would be to separate them as a 501c3, a nonprofit versus a profit, because an assembly hall could be for profit. Why would we want to waive that as opposed to a nonprofit?
I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, and I would be okay with that.
Okay, so if we made a note there for 501c3.
So if we've made that adjustment, we've taken out the place of worship, and then we've also made that designation whether or not it's a 501 or C or whatever. So, is there any other structure, office, industrial, commercial, retail, residential that anyone wants to address?
I also agree. Again, I think that this is something, whatever we adopt, I think we should revisit this 6 months from now to see if it has stopped any kind of growth that we're missing out on because people don't want to.
I would concur 100%. Is that legally, can we make the change? And I guess we can because we're not bound by the 90 day. Biannually. Perfect.
As far as the breaking out by a 501c3 or not, I'm not sure I'm not sure I would recommend that. Perhaps just a place of worship versus an assembly hall would maybe be a better way to do that.
And this is only on new structures, right? This wouldn't apply to any
No, this
existing.
is only new development.
New structure.
Okay, so we're back to place of worship.
I just don't think you should make a category change based on the tax status of the development.
You don't think that would
What
hold
would be
better
the
than a
difference?
place of worship?
I don't see the difference if it's a place of worship or if it's I
Which-
mean, what's
which-
your reasoning is what I want to know.
Yeah.
Which one's going to hold up if it's challenged? I mean, that's because that's
There's,
what I
there's,
that's
there's
what I was
usually more
thinking.
controversy around religion than there is anything else when people are.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I think that,
And how do you define a place of worship?
yeah, I mean, I guess my thoughts are is I would keep them together. I guess is probably what I would.
Okay.
And then if you want to reduce, and I wouldn't necessarily reduce it to 0, maybe reduce it lower.
Keeping in mind that that's 650, you say 650, and that doesn't sound like much. It's $650 per 1,000 square feet. So, I mean, that could potentially be a significant amount of money for a good-sized church.
I can't make a motion, but I liked what someone said earlier about just a 0 fee there is what I liked.
Well, it's a workshop, so we
workshop,
can't vote on
Mary.
anything, but I like the idea of a 0 fee for a place of worship.
Since it is a workshop, I mean, I'd be happy to take a deeper look at that issue, and
Yeah.
when we come back, and, propose a final fee schedule.
Let's
for
do that.
understanding the commission's kind of consensus.
And I used the wrong terminology when I said a motion. I feel that as the chairman of the meeting, that I shouldn't be the one saying this is what I think we should do. I think it would be a better way of expressing what I was saying rather than a motion. I apologize.
And do we want to, and I hate to look at it from this perspective, but do we want to discourage any further private schools being built in Lynn Haven?
No.
I mean, that's $650 per student.
You legally can't do that.
Yeah. And that's something that maybe Rob can clarify before the next adoption of such fees.
So when it says per student, Ms. Richard, I think maybe what they're saying is, I mean, it would probably almost wash out because if you're doing it by the square footage or by the number of students, it's by how many will it hold, you know? So it might be that the square footage might even be higher than, so. Are there further comments or revisions that anyone would like to look at?
I just think we should revisit it after it's been in place for a while.
I
to
think
see if it's
everybody
had a
seems to be in
we would.
agreement
Big
on that.
impact.
I think everybody's in agreement on that. And so the only change that we've really made then would be to either not have a fee on the place of worship assembly hall and then possibly have Mr. Jackson research whether to keep those together or not keep them together. Is that correct?
Yeah, and then the private school issue. I
And the
think that
private
there was
school
a
issue
discussion.
per student or square footage, which would be the better. Is there anything else that we need to address? Okay, I think we're good then, so am I directing, our city planner and our city staff and our city attorney to put their heads together at some point and maybe draft an ordinance to bring before the commission when you have it ready? Okay, I think everybody did a great job on that one, okay, moving forward. So we'll dismiss this workshop. We'll move on to our next workshop, and we do appreciate your patience in waiting for us. And this will be a presentation by Carr, Riggs, and Ingram of our 2017 draft audit.
Uh-oh, no signal.
Did anybody hand out drafts of the financial statements? Do you have copies? Does everybody have copies or no?
I just have the one from the meeting.
I think I crapped out.
There we go. Oh, he's brought us work copies. That's sweet. Oh, I guess he didn't.
I don't know.
I've got that one from the meeting.
If there's one short, I'll take it. But
I went to the meeting earlier, so I think we've got another one.
Is there,
Yep.
I've got the email if I'm.
If you have one other, I think we'd love to see one too.
I'll take it if you. I didn't know if there'd be. Oh, you needed that. Yeah. No problem.
everybody knows me, but my name is Richard McKinney. I'm a partner at the local audit firm local office of the audit firm, Carr, Riggs and Ingram. Is that better? Sorry about that. And we completed our audited financial statements for September 30th, 2017, and y'all have a copy of that in front of you. I know you haven't had a lot of chance to look at it, if any chance at all, but what I'll do is I'll go through it and I'll just hit the highlights just real briefly, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And if questions come up later after you get a chance to look at it a little closer, please feel free to call me or email me, and I'm happy to address any questions you have. The 30,000-foot overview, if you look on page 6 in the section called Management Discussion and Analysis, on page 6 it shows a summary of the current year compared to the prior year at the government-wide level, at the full accrual level. On page 6 is the statement of net position, or similar to a balance sheet. And on page 7 is the statement of change in net position, which is similar to an income statement. So if you look on page 7, it shows that the total revenues for this past year in the governmental funds was $15,258,000, and the total expenses was $10,550,000, for a bottom line of $4,707,891 in the governmental activities. Yes.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
Do you prefer just giving the whole presentation and then us ask questions, or you want us to chime in as you
It's probably
go?
better if you interrupt me,
Okay.
because it's easier to answer the question as we go, and I
Right.
think it'll keep you from having to remember it through the whole thing and not.
Great.
not
Well,
be able to-
I
Yes, sir.
appreciate that. So just on page 7 then, I didn't dive down and try to dissect the number, but do you happen to recall, or maybe staff recall, on page 7, other, there was that, in 2017, we had an increase up to $681,571. Do you know what that other is? That's a big jump from the previous year.
I do not. It's
Okay, that's fine. I haven't dissected it to try to figure out exactly what it was, but it just something that popped at me.
Okay.
I think we sold the Lions Club. Some real estate, other.
Yeah. That's probably exactly what it is. Thank you. Okay,
I-
thank you, Beverly.
I can verify that and get
That's
you the
fine.
detail.
That-
I
that's
know,
probably exactly what it is.
interest income would be in there,
Yeah.
and definitely sales of assets would be, proceeds would be in
Sale
there.
of assets.
Mr. McKinney, may I make one other comment too?
Absolutely.
And this is to the members of the public that are here. We received this audit last evening, and so that's why there aren't copies, but I will assure you that there will rapidly be copies made available to the public. So I do apologize that you don't have a copy to look at today.
Thanks. In the utility funds for the year ended September 30th, 2017, there's $12.5 million in revenues, and that's compared to $13,700,000 in the prior year, and $8,381,000 in expenses, which is comparable to $8,100,000 in the prior year total expenses. So that's fairly similar. So we have $4,139,000 in the bottom line, and that's water, sewer, sanitation, and stormwater. And the prior year, we had $5,630,000. So total citywide, the bottom line, we had $8,847,000. Now that's on the full accrual basis. With GASB 34, what we did is we changed from a general. We used to just have the general fund and the budget basis, which is a current focus. So we didn't record assets in the general fund, and we didn't record long-term debt in the general fund. Instead, it was compared to like the budget. When you're preparing your budget, if you're going to buy assets, you've got to show that as an expense because you've got to write the check. You've got to pay the whole amount all at once. And when you borrow money, you have all that money come in so you can spend it, so we show it as revenue. And that's the budget basis, and that's how we've always done the general fund. And that basis for the financial statements here starts on page 16. But what they did with GASB 34 several years ago is they decided to prepare financial statements on a full accrual basis, so it's comparable to business-type enterprises. So now with the full accrual basis, we record our assets on the balance sheet, and we record our liabilities as liabilities. And so there's a difference. It's the same general fund, but there's a difference in how we record them, and there's a reconciliation in here that shows all the detail on how to get from page 12 to page 16. Those are the two different ones.
It's
Now-
business type activities.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So on page 12 is the full accrual governmental and business type activities. It's a little more detail than what I just showed you on page 6 and page 7, but it's the same basis of accounting. It's the full accrual. And so if you'll look, the total fund balance for the general fund on page 13 is $27,487,000 for the governmental activities and $36,511,000 for the business type activities.
Going back to page 10, second to the last paragraph, the unassigned general fund balance, $4 million. Is that our reserve?
No, that is, if you look on page 16,
Okay.
this is the general fund, and
Right.
it's the budget basis of accounting, like I was talking about before. If you'll look at in the general fund column, you have total assets of 11 million,
Right.
total debt, total liabilities of 2.5 million. The reason the total liabilities is so low is this is a current focus. This is not long-term, so your long-term debt's not on here.
Right.
And so then your fund balance, the difference between those is 8,857,000.
Okay.
Well, all but 4,311,000 is reserved. So your unassigned general fund balance, which is what's available from your assets less your liabilities and not restricted, is that
Gotcha.
$4,011,670. That's where that number is.
Which includes the reserve, though.
It's
right?
it's unreserved.
It's-
The reserve portion is right above it. You can see the law enforcement education is 10,000. Capital repair and replacement, which is impact fees, 1,589,000. The surtax that was paid that hadn't been spent is 1,078,000.
Okay.
The unspent bond proceeds from the $3,910,000 bond,
Right.
revenue bond, is 1,539,000, and then we get a little grant reserve.
Right. Okay.
And Mr. McKinney, if I may, for
Yes,
the
ma'am.
rest of the commission, if you have a comment, if you see something, please just jump in. This is an informal discussion and your first look, and everybody understands that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And then the other governmental funds on page 16, that's the CRA and the debt service fund. And then if we go to the page 21 is the budget comparison for the general fund. And this shows the original budget and then the final approved budget compared to actual and the differences. And the most important part of this statement is that the final budget is more than the actual expenditures, so it shows that the council approved all of these expenditures in total. Now, line items some may be more, some may be less, but in total, the council approved everything that was spent during the year, and you had an excess of 618,000. So that's the most important thing on here, but it also shows that you received 700,000 more in revenues than your final budget anticipated, and you had an excess of 618,000 that you didn't spend that you budgeted. So for a total of 1,318,000 favorable to budget, to final budget.
Great. Which is a healthy sign.
On page 23, now the basis for the financial statements for the utility funds is the same in the government-wide and the proprietary statements here, but this just shows more detail. But the basis is the same. It's full accrual because it's user charges is the basis for your revenues. So it's, they're both full accrual. They're both on the same basis, and they both show your assets on the balance sheet and your liabilities on the balance sheet. And here you can see your water fund. If you look on page 25, your revenues for the year for the water fund was $4,436,000. Your expenses were right at $2.5 million. For bottom line, operating bottom line of about $2 million. The sewer fund, you had $4,158,000 in revenues and $2,576,000 in expenses for a bottom line of $1,582,000. Your sanitation, you had $2.7 million in revenues and right at $2 million in expenses for a bottom line of about $750,000. Stormwater, you took in about $520,000. You spent $616,000 for a loss of $96,000. Now this doesn't include transfers, which is shown on the next page. So your bottom line for all of your utility funds was $4,178,000. Now we transferred, if you look on the next page, we transferred out of sanitation fund $719,000 and put that into stormwater to help fund the stormwater projects.
Which we're working on.
The city in 2017 had a couple of bond issues. If you look on page 51, note 9 is the long-term debt for the governmental activities, and the next note is long-term debt for the business type activities. So if you look at the bottom of page 51, you can see we started the year with $2,359,000 in long-term debt in the governmental activities, and we had the additional bond of $3,000,009. We had principal payments of $320,000, so we ended the year with $5,948,000. The detail of those bond issues are on the next couple pages. The new bond issue, the description is at the top of page 53.
Hey, Richard, could you explain your thoughts about the transfers out and in?
You want my personal opinion?
Well,
Remember, he's a CPA.
Absolutely.
You're a CPA.
From a business perspective,
Yes,
is, you guys are the commissioners, you run the city. And you take the money that the citizens provide for you and you spend it on behalf of the citizens. If they don't like it, then they don't vote for you. But as long as you're spending the money that you take in, this is my personal opinion, as long as you spend the money that you take in for the benefit of the citizens, then I personally don't have a problem with you transferring money out of sanitation and putting it in stormwater. Because the stormwater's got to be funded, and it's got to be funded from somewhere. So if as a citizen, I'm paying for sanitation and you're putting in stormwater, well, maybe I should have paid less in sanitation, but then I should have paid more for stormwater. So I'm still getting the benefit of the stormwater, regardless of whether I'm paying it through a sanitation revenue or a stormwater revenue. Now, ideally, every fund should stand alone, and you do get some benefit by by tying the expenses in each fund to the revenue in that fund. And if you can do that, I think that's great. But if you're short in one fund and you have the excess in the other fund, if you transfer it, you balance your revenues and expenses so you're not overcharging people in one fund and have excess sitting there not being used in another fund. So to some extent, if you're doing transfers, then it still benefits the citizens. If you're doing it willy-nilly, and definitely not if it's not approved, it has to be approved in accordance with the budget. But if you don't have a basis for your transfers and it's not through a plan and you're not funding what's necessary, then of course I don't like that idea. But I don't have a problem with cities transferring from one to another when that money is needed in the other fund and you have it in the other fund. It still benefits the citizens who's ultimately paying for it. And we got to pay for it one way or another. So
Thank you.
hopefully that answers your question. The business type activities, long-term debt on page 54. The schedule in the middle shows the beginning bond issues, $18,016,000. And then we had the revenue refunding of $6,090,000 added. And then we used that and then some to pay off the bond that we refunded of $7,397,000. So we ended up with 18,346,000, and that includes the increase in the notes. We had the stormwater ditch, original contract was 2,046,000. We had an amendment to make it 3,720,000, and that increase of 1,674,000, that's what that is in the additions on the notes. And the description of those additions are on page 56 and 57. There's more detail of the bond issue, the refunding bond issue, and the note, the change order for the note. There is on page 70, we have a subsequent events disclosure that explains the new notes that since the year has ended, we've had some new bond issues, and this explains them on page 70. There's SRF notes of $6,600,000 and $3,572,000 for water and sewer improvements, and then the $6 million. It's $6,090,000, and the reason that I have to take these financial statements back, and the reason I can't issue the final today, is because that number in the top of that note on page 15, or on note 15, is there's a transposition in there, and I've got to fix that. But the actual note was $6,090,000, and along with the other $3,910,000 was an even $10 million in the first paragraph of that note, and that just explains what's happened since these financial statements were issued, so users of the financial statements can see what the debt is at 9/30/17, and then see that that had changed somewhat since the end of the year before these financial statements were issued. As far as the findings, the report, the compliance section begins on page 92, and the reports that are required by the federal government and the state of Florida and the Auditor General are included in there, and you can read the reports. They're not terribly exciting. There's nothing in there that you don't see every year. It's just the basic requirements of those reports, and there's no findings in there associated with those that are required to be put in these financial statements. I can go through them individually if you want, but
Well,
it doesn't.
the only thing I would like to point out on
Yes.
page 93, and I know it's said again on another one of these notes, but the additional matters, if you don't mind reading that part in section 1050, you see the last paragraph of additional matters on
Right.
page 93, please.
Yeah, this report is required by the state of Florida Auditor General, and they have specific requirements in Chapter 10-550 that we report on after doing our audit, and we look at during our audit. And Section 10-554, paragraph 1, part I3, says we have to communicate noncompliance with grant agreements or contracts or abuse that have occurred or likely to have occurred. So if during our audit we run across those, then this is where we would put that. We didn't find anything that met those requirements, so we don't have anything in that under that category.
And I point that out on purpose just to say that I appreciate the hard work that the city employees do, and everybody's doing everything above board and according to the contracts that the commission approves.
Absolutely.
Thank
And this paragraph expands what we do as auditors to include stuff that there's no other basis for including this stuff. Abuse is not covered in any of our other requirements.
Right.
And that's why the Auditor General put it in here. Because if I see abuse, which is like somebody taking advantage of a statute that prohibits a certain type of expense, and it doesn't rise to the level of materiality, and it doesn't misstate your financial statements, but it's abusive. If they're buying alcohol on business trips and charging it to the city, it may be a small amount, but it's abuse.
Right.
And so if we see any of that, this is where we're required to report it. And it also goes to the point of likely to have occurred. So if we see something we don't have any evidence, we don't have any concrete evidence of it, but we're pretty sure it's there and we see it, we are required by that standard to put that in this paragraph, and that's where that would be. And we didn't see anything, or we would have discussed it.
Thank you.
The report on page 95 is required by Florida statutes. We We look at your compliance with your investment policies and the state of Florida investment requirements. And if we see any violations of what you're allowed to invest in, then this is where that would be, and we didn't have anything to report. The next two reports are internal controls related to financial statements, the first one, and then related to state major programs, all your state grants. And then there's a list of your total state grants on page 100, and this shows the grants you received during the year that totaled $1,027,000. If you have less than $750,000, then we don't put this report in here. It's not required, and we don't break it out. But once you cross that threshold, then all of the grants that apply are on here, and we do it separate for federal and state. You didn't meet the federal requirement limit of $750,000, so there's no scheduled federal expenditures. But your state, you had $1,027,000. So this is all the state grants.
Which again, Mayor, if I may, just,
ahead.
again, this is a great testimony to staff. I mean, the fact that we went out and got $1 million between staff and Panhandle Engineering, I know is very involved with some of that as well, so that's
Absolutely.
good. That's $1 million, $1,027,000.
Anyone else from the board have a question or comment they'd like to make to Mr. McKinney, or question for him? And once again, as I said at the beginning of the workshop, because we did not get the copies of this until last evening, I don't have them for the public to peruse today, but we will very soon. If you heard something today that you had a question about, I would give you this opportunity now if you had a question. Anyone? Yes, sir. If you would address it to the commission, and then we'll call Mr. McKinney if the question is for him. Thank you so much, Mr. McKinney. We appreciate all of your work.
Name is Brad Yunt, 210 Lakeview Terrace. What I heard described was a compilation. I did not hear described an audit. I see on the slide it's called an audit workshop. Did we not get what we asked for? Did we not ask for the right engagement? That's my question. Secondly, I've seen examples of refinancing of bond issues where the salesman, in essence, for the bonds comes and says that the interest rates are favorable to refinance the bonds. It appears as though we give them the work to do the job because they went and investigated this for us. We did not competitively bid it. We did not advertise in the places that one advertises governmental bond issues. So my question is whether this meets the requirements of the generally accepted accounting practices, generally accepted auditing standards, and the government regulations. Those are my questions.
I appreciate your questions and your input, and I would say that according to Florida statute, what we've been presented here as far as an audit report from the accounting firm meets the Florida statutes. Now, as if everything in here has been completely discussed, if all questions have been asked, if all issues are put forward, I would probably answer no to that at this point because of the limited amount of time that the commission has had to review this, and I would invite your questions to be asked again at a later time when you've had time to review it, if that would be acceptable. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, at this time I will adjourn this public workshop, and we will resume in approximately 10 minutes for our regularly scheduled 6 p.m. commission meeting. Thank you.